The most important thing that attorneys need to know about FEMA after a disaster is that you should encourage everybody to apply to FEMA, because FEMA is often the pathway to getting other disaster help. So I tell everyone, tell every client, everyone you run into, apply to FEMA, apply to the Small Business Administration for a disaster loan, because by applying to FEMA, you keep your options open. FEMA is the gateway to get you to an SBA, Small Business Administration loans for disasters. And you say SBA, but the SBA is really the largest provider of disaster recovery monies. So it really should be the Disaster and Small Business Administration. So apply to FEMA, apply to the SBA within the 60-day window or whatever they extend it to, because if you don't, you're losing out on keeping your options open. You don't have to take an SBA loan, but you have to apply within the right window. And also, FEMA determines what your FEMA verified loss is, which can often help you get other money later down the road, like a community development block grant money. So all these things start with applying to FEMA. What kind of skill does a lawyer need to help after a disaster? The biggest one is a desire to help people. And the second one is to have a curiosity and wanting to do a holistic approach. Because when you do disaster law, you're not just doing one kind of law, you're not just doing FEMA appeals, you're doing everything these people might need. So to be a good disaster attorney, you need to be able to help them with landlord-tenant issues, with title issues, maybe with family law issues. It runs the whole gamut. So the only thing we really need to have a lawyer help us help others is that they have a desire to help people and a curiosity to make sure that they look at every legal need somebody might have after a disaster. There's a lot of resources out there for attorneys that want to volunteer and help after a disaster. Your local legal aid, your local bar association, where they're willing to provide one-on-one support. There's disasterlegalaid.org, which is a national disaster legal resource webpage that has state and national resources. The resources on that webpage are even mobile friendly, so you can actually access them while you're out with the public at like disaster recovery centers. There's also local resources like the State Bar of Texas, for example, keeps disaster resources on their webpage. So you're able to see, for example, videos of me doing a training after Harvey talking about flood insurance and FEMA 101. There's tons of resources like that by other people that you're able to access anytime from your home or even from your phone.
We're going to cover three things. We're going to take sort of a 30,000-foot look. We're going to give you the overview about FEMA and the background, and then move on to answering a question that a lot of people, a lot of clients, people that you'll encounter are going to ask or wonder about, which is, why do I need legal help regarding a whole range of FEMA issues? Isn't it just a bureaucratic process? And so Tracy's going to cover that. And then Saundra will wrap up with some quick tips. And among those really important tips that she's going to cover about what you need to know about FEMA is take a tour through the disasterlegalaid.org website, which will become your best friend. So Cindy, get us started.
Hello, I'm Cindy Huddleston from Florida Legal Services, and I'm going to cover the really basics about FEMA, give you a big overview, the 30,000 view of FEMA. But before I start, I wanted to share with you an email that I got this morning from a colleague who works in another organization. It was really apropos to what we're doing here today. And she says, "My son is going to disaster camp at the local museum. They're spending the week learning about natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, etc. Seems to involve getting really dirty and having fun. At any rate, after I picked him up yesterday, he was telling me about what he learned. Then from the back seat I hear, 'Mommy, did you know there's a disaster called a salami?' It took me a little while, but I figured out he was talking about a tsunami. I will never again experience a deli menu the same." So I thought you might enjoy that. You know, I say tsunami, you say salami. It's a disaster. Okay, but to start, on to the basics. And of course, the starting point is to talk about what the law and the policy is. The governing act for FEMA is the Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, called the Stafford Act. It's at 42 U.S.C. Section 5121 et sec. Implementing regulations are codified at 44 CFR Section 206.11 et sec. And we have a variety of policy documents that FEMA has issued. And in fact, in the past, I would say 5-7 years, FEMA's gotten a lot better, in my opinion, about posting a lot of policy online. They have fact sheets, it's actually called Fact Sheet, and they have those for covering pretty much every program they have, different issues, so I urge you to look online for that. They have the Unified Guidance, which I've given you the site to. They also have the Applicant's Guide to the IHP program, which every person who applies for FEMA is going to get this, but it has a variety of information in there. And just recently, FEMA has published for proposed comments, Individual Assistance Program and Policy Guide. That was in April of 2018. This is on their website too, I believe, still. And that kind of gives you an insight into how FEMA interprets its own governing law. It's kind of an interesting read, although it has not been finalized yet. So the key provisions. You need to know about what triggers FEMA assistance. And so to trigger FEMA's involvement, there has to be a presidential declaration of a disaster. And that is only going to happen if your governor requests that the president issue a disaster declaration. And in that request, it's very important that the governor include a request for individual assistance, because as we mentioned yesterday, the meat and potatoes for our clients, the program that gets money in their hand or services in their hand would be the individual assistance program. Public assistance would govern things mainly like infrastructure, debris removal, things like that. That goes to help the state and local communities get back on their feet, local government communities, but not necessarily to people themselves. So one of the things you're really looking for is whether that declaration disaster includes individual assistance. Now, don't be upset if you see a disaster declaration and it has no mention of individual assistance, because what often happens is that the first disaster declaration that's issued will be for public assistance normally. It may not say anything about individual assistance in there. That does not mean that there will not be a later amendment, because there often are amendments after amendments after amendments to a disaster declaration. FEMA and the state and local officials have to get on the ground, and they have to really do an assessment of what damage there is and be able to justify that request. And you can pretty much be assured that that's going on behind the scenes, and that often the disaster declaration will be amended to include individual assistance. What we see in Florida, because we're such a large state, is that there will be amendment after amendment, continuing to add different counties as the assessment goes on. The standard period for FEMA registration is 60 days, and by registration, I really mean an application. FEMA calls it registration, so that's what it is, an application. And that 60 days begins following the date of the President's disaster declaration. It can be extended and often is extended if the state requests it. However, FEMA will accept late applications for an additional 60 days for registrants who provide suitable documentation, that's the term that's used in law, to support and justify the reason for the delay in their registration. For example, if you have a client who's been hospitalized because they were injured in the disaster, that might constitute cause to be able to file late for FEMA assistance. How to apply. Applicants can register by phone, online, or in person at a disaster recovery center if there's any open. And I mentioned yesterday that one thing we saw in Florida, which we had not seen a lot of in the past, was FEMA's use of mobile disaster recovery centers. So instead of having a brick and mortar place that someone could go to apply for benefits or talk to a FEMA official, there would be, I guess, a steering wheel and bumper facility that they could visit. And in a state like Florida, which during Irma had such widespread destruction, it was hard for FEMA to open disaster recovery centers everywhere it needed to at the same time. So they used mobile disaster recovery centers pretty often. We urge you to urge clients to keep their registration number, password, pins, whatever, and keep those in a safe place. If you're representing a registrant, you need to make sure you get an authorization for release of information. And I'm sure that anyone on this panel and many folks in the advocate community would be willing to share the form that they use. So just let us know if you have need for that form. There are, as you can imagine, special considerations for immigrant families who are affected by a disaster. Well, let me start with kind of the bottom line for now, is that all immigrants, even those who are undocumented, are right now eligible for short-term, non-cash, in-kind emergency disaster relief and similar services. You know, they can stay in shelters, they can participate in mass feeding sites. For FEMA cash assistance programs, at least one member of the household has to be a U.S. citizen, a lawful permanent resident, or other qualified alien. However, parents who are undocumented or who don't have the requisite immigration status can apply on behalf of their minor children. Now, I say that with the caveat that I think that we all know that there have been rumors and leaked drafts of policy changes and intentions to do, executive orders to tighten up some of these provisions, including provisions that exclude FEMA benefits from being considered as a public assistance benefit that would make someone a public charge. So right now, it's true that FEMA benefits, if you get them, will not impact your ability to adjust your status in the future. But we really don't know what the future is going to hold with this administration and in future administrations, and we do know that there's been some movement toward trying to tighten up a lot of these public assistance programs, including FEMA benefits. We just don't know. So it's probably prudent if you have a client who fits this situation, does not meet the requisite immigrant status criteria. Perhaps they want to speak to an immigration lawyer in your office, or it might be a good idea to partner with some pro bono immigration attorneys if you don't have anyone in your office who practices in that area, because we just don't know. And there's a lot of considerations that immigrant families want to think about when they apply for FEMA benefits. We're not trying to promote fear and a chilling effect, which probably is one of the goals of leaking that memo in the first place. But it is something that is it's a threat that people need to at least think about and make a reasoned decision. Right now, only the applicants have to disclose their Social Security number or their immigrant status. That means in the family, if parents are applying for their child, only the child's Social Security number or immigrant status is going to be asked for. The parents do not have to put their Social Security number. That's because in many cases, the parents may not have the Social Security number to even put down. The Individual and Household Assistance Program, as we said, this is really one of the most common federal assistance available to survivors of a disaster. It contains two parts: housing assistance and financial assistance to address other needs, called other needs assistance. And that's kind of exactly what it sounds like it is. It's assistance other than housing assistance. Individuals and households can receive more than one type of assistance. They can get housing assistance and other needs assistance. However, the maximum amount that they can get under both combined is $33,300. I think that's still the maximum.
For this fiscal year,
for this fiscal,
34,000.
34,000, excuse me. And FEMA publishes notice of that amount every year in the October Federal Register, so usually in October it's adjusted upwards. Individual assistance is not counted as income for the determination of eligibility for welfare benefits, for income assistance benefits, or other federal needs-tested benefit programs. And what that means is that if you get FEMA assistance, the money you get from FEMA is not going to count against your SNAP benefits, your Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, or your TANF benefits, which is kind of the federal cash assistance program for families with children, and that stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. Normally, pretty much any income you get in will count against your eligibility and the amount of assistance that you'll receive in SNAP and TANF. But it's not true for FEMA benefits. It does not count against those benefits at all. In addition, individual assistance is exempt from garnishment, except for when FEMA needs to recover assistance that was fraudulently attained or misapplied. Again, good time to remind folks that people need to keep documentation of how they spend their FEMA assistance to show that it was spent in the way it was intended to be spent. So, who is eligible for housing assistance? Homeowners and renters residing in the disaster area at the time of the disaster are potentially eligible. For owners, the primary residence must have been destroyed or be uninhabitable or inaccessible. Renters whose primary residence is no longer available as a result of the disaster can also get help with housing. Insured persons whose insurance claims were denied or are waiting on claims filed with insurance companies to get acted on can get help, but as we said yesterday, people have to know that they will have to repay FEMA upon receipt of insurance proceeds if the insurance does end up paying up. There are 4 forms of housing assistance. There's money for renting alternative housing, direct assistance, which is rent-free occupancy in federally provided temporary housing. There's money for repair of owner-occupied housing and money for replacement of owner-occupied housing. But a warning, disaster victims are expected to accept the first offer of housing assistance that FEMA makes to them. An unwarranted refusal can result in forfeiture of housing assistance. So what about transitional sheltering assistance? We've talked a lot about that in the past couple of days, and you've heard a lot about it. Well, as you know, as you've learned, that's assistance that's usually provided through direct payments to hotels and motels on behalf of displaced families. It's usually provided in intervals of 14 days with 14-day extensions for up to 6 months or sometimes longer, thanks to lawsuits that are filed. And it sounds like a really good program, and it is a really beneficial and great program, but it's dependent on there being participating hotels, and in some parts of Florida, we found that there were not hotels that were participating in the program. And the recipient can still be charged by the hotel or motel for other fees. For example, if they want to bring a pet with them, they're going to have to pay the additional charge for a pet. So there are other fees that the hotel can charge, and sometimes those fees make it impossible for people to be able to accept the assistance. Direct housing assistance includes things like FEMA trailers and other housing units provided directly by FEMA. This was a hot topic in Katrina, and after Katrina, FEMA did not rely on trailers as much, although there's been some resurgence in talking about the need for trailers. Again, it's not as simple as it sounds. Mobile homes and trailers have to be placed on sites that FEMA approves, and the community zoning ordinances have to be complied with. And if local zoning ordinances don't allow trailers, then you're not going to get a FEMA trailer in that area. The applicant is also responsible normally for utility setup costs and utility security deposits. Repair and replace is designed to restore a home to a safe and sanitary living condition. Not to make it better than it was before, just safe and sanitary. Bring it up to the most minimal standards. A wide variety of repairs are covered by FEMA housing assistance. Structural components like foundation, exterior walls, roofs, windows, heating, ventilation, gas, water, sewer, electrical, plumbing, interior floors, walls, ceilings, doors, cabinetry, and the like. Other needs assistance is the second part of individual assistance available to households. It's exactly like what it sounds, as I said earlier. It's to meet needs other than housing needs. These include disaster-related personal property loss, transportation, medical, dental, funeral expenses, and moving and storage expenses. For many other needs claims with FEMA, applicants must first apply for an SBA loan and be declined or not receive sufficient funds from SBA. There are exceptions to this requirement, and some of the exceptions to this you have to apply for an SBA loan include funeral, medical, dental, child care, and assistance for miscellaneous items. For those who don't want to take out a loan but are forced to apply for a loan, I think there's some reasons to be heartened. The last time I looked at the approval rate for the SBA loans, it was fairly low. Of course, this can work both ways. As you know, you're not going to be able to get much money from the Individual Assistance Program, and if you want to get an SBA loan to assist with repairing your home or for some other disaster-related expense, you want to get approved. But in the past, the last time I looked, the approval rates were fairly low. Appeals of FEMA decisions, notifications of the award or the denial of assistance, and if you think the award's too low, you may want to appeal, so you could be appealing an award. There are common denial reasons, and it's important to familiarize yourself with those denial decisions, and they're set out in FEMA's applicant guide to the individual and households program that I mentioned earlier. Appeals have to be in writing, and they have to explain the reason for the appeal. If you're appealing on behalf of a client, you must include a copy of a written consent form. Decisions are usually made by FEMA within 30 days, or at least that's how long they say they usually take to make them, but FEMA has 90 days to issue a decision. When a FEMA applicant gets assistance, the applicant has to agree to repay FEMA from insurance proceeds or recoveries that it gets from any other source in an amount equal to the value of the assistance provided. And applicants have to return funds to FEMA if the assistance was provided erroneously or if the applicant spent funds inappropriately or obtained assistance through fraud. Again, keep your documentation, even if it, for years. Clients need to be cautioned to keep that documentation. A little more about the SBA. The Small Business Administration is a primary source of federal funds for certain recovery assistance for disaster victims. As I said earlier, the applicant must apply for an SBA loan for certain other needs expenses such as personal property, moving and storage, and transportation assistance. The SBA provides low-interest disaster loans, and the interest rate is set by law to repair or replace homes, personal properties, or businesses that sustain damage not covered by insurance. But again, just because it's called the SBA, it's not limited to business. It's also for individual homeowners. Homeowners can borrow up to, and I hope this is the current figure, $200,000 for disaster-related home repairs, and homeowners and renters can borrow up to $40,000 to replace disaster-damaged personal property.
I'm looking at Brittany, who just worked for the SBA a couple months ago.
Sounds right still?
So.
Okay. Thanks. And disaster unemployment assistance will also be mentioned in the disaster declaration. And those are benefits that are available following a major disaster to anyone who has become unemployed as a direct result of the disaster, but who isn't eligible for ordinary unemployment compensation benefits. Who would that be, for example? That could be someone who has been promised a job, has been signed on for a company, but then the disaster strikes and they're never able to even start work. So they're not going to be eligible for regular unemployment assistance, for example. And that's just one example of someone who wouldn't be eligible for regular unemployment assistance, but might be eligible for disaster unemployment. In Florida, our agency that administers the disaster unemployment assistance program claimed that the vast majority of people who applied for disaster unemployment were actually eligible for regular unemployment. And what states do is they will screen someone to make sure they're not eligible for regular unemployment before they screen them under disaster unemployment criteria. Disaster unemployment is available for the length of time prescribed in the disaster declaration, but for a period no longer than 26 weeks following the declaration. And the unemployment due to the disaster has to continue through that period. So there will be some reporting requirements that are that will come into play for disaster unemployment compensation, just like for regular unemployment. You have to apply within 30 days unless you have good cause. I'm not going to go into disaster SNAP, although I've put it in the materials because, as you know, it's near and dear to my heart, and it's a very important program for low-income communities. In Florida, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, got a disaster SNAP in Hurricane Irma. So it's a really important program to help low-income communities, and just to make sure that you don't forget about the importance of disaster SNAP. It's not going to be listed in your disaster declaration normally. It's going to be something that's determined between USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service, FNS, and the state agency that administers your food stamp, your SNAP program in your state. I did want you to have it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
All right. Okay, thank you for going over all of that. So I'm going to jump into the variety of reasons that our clients actually need our help on FEMA issues. And first, the FEMA cases are generally the #1 legal issue that we have dealt with post-disaster at TRLA. I don't know if that's the case at other entities, but we've had, it accounts for at least like 50% of all of the disaster-related legal cases for each disaster, and I've worked on 15 in the last 15 plus years. So, I'm not going to go through all this because this is the kind of thing that Cindy covered, but want to just remind y'all, and Saundra made this point yesterday, that the decisions that FEMA makes don't just impact whether or not that individual gets money from FEMA or how much they get. It also feeds into, right now there's a Red Cross program that is including loss verifications from FEMA and whether somebody's going to be eligible for financial assistance from the Red Cross. It factored into how our state administered a direct housing program. And so other entities are going to rely on it. It affects how the CDBG money gets distributed across the state. So it is really important to keep an eye on those FEMA issues. And then, since a lot of y'all here are from Texas, you want to know that we do things a little bit differently. So Cindy explained how we have the FEMA housing assistance versus other needs assistance, all the non-housing stuff. In Texas, we have a bifurcated process. It gets really confusing, but we have one FEMA application number, so they make that phone call or they do their online application, and they explain the types of assistance they're looking for or whatever facts kind of trigger that consideration. But you've got FEMA making the housing decisions, and you have the Texas Health and Human Services Commission making the decisions about other needs assistance. And the letters still have FEMA letterhead. You submit your appeals to FEMA. But FEMA is then to forward the O&A parts over to the state. And there's a different appeal process after your first appeal. It's very similar for round 1, but then Texas, because of its own regulations and policies, allow for multiple levels of appeal, which can get more intense. Okay, we hear this a lot. We've heard it from FEMA. We've heard it from case managers. Well-intentioned, but why does your client need a lawyer? Well, it's an administrative agency, just like these others I have listed up here. And not everybody needs a lawyer to navigate those systems. If you apply and you get the outcome you're looking for, and hope you know what you may be eligible for, what outcome you should be looking for, great. And there's many, many people who are going to apply for FEMA who are not ever going to reach us. But some people need help with getting help from administrative agencies. And a legal professional, as opposed to case managers who mean well and are trying to fill a gap and help with appeals, legal professionals are going to spot legal issues because that's what we're trained to do, and then may be able to use other strategies to address a bigger picture, more issues. So if a client is saying, I still need more continued rental assistance from FEMA because my landlord still hasn't fixed my house. Well, what's going on with the landlord? Why haven't they fixed it yet? Have you used the right procedures to request repairs? We could tackle both of those things. And when we have situations where FEMA is going to only give you assistance because you meet their ownership definition, we can look at it and see, is there something we can do to clear title or make the argument using the right terminology? Just as an example, years ago, we were told by FEMA, we need this person to sign a declaration saying they're the owner. That may not always be true, but, and it might even work for a FEMA appeal at times, but it really shouldn't. And as legal professionals, as lawyers, we're going to be able to look at those things, and the case managers doing these things don't understand those things. And I'm going to give credit to Hannah Dial, who worked on this PowerPoint with me as we delivered it to some folks in Corpus Christi. We were kind of thinking through from our clients, who is it that really needs our help? And so some people are just fine early on until they're not, right? They hit an obstacle, they're not getting the outcome they wanted, then they want to know, okay, what's going wrong here? Is there something else I can do? And then you have folks who are just from the outset less prepared to navigate the process on their own. These are just kind of examples as we've worked with different people, but if you have a hard time writing or reading, then it's going to be harder to go through these form letters that are somewhat cryptic and then figure out what you need to do next. If you aren't tech savvy, you're going to have a harder time checking your application online, and some people were signing up online and checked the wrong box, so all the notices were going online. Language barriers can complicate that process too. It can be harder to get some of the information from FEMA. They absolutely will provide someone to speak to you in the language that you need, but it's not as straightforward a process. You may end up with situations where we've had FEMA folks at disaster recovery centers ask my staff to translate for a client because they didn't have anyone on site who spoke Spanish, and that's what our client needed to use. That wasn't a great plan. Now, FEMA's messaging about appeals. I don't know if you guys have seen the press releases that FEMA puts out about their process, but these are some quotes I pulled from a few. It's not very involved. It's just something's missing. Let's take a look. It's easy. It can be easily fixed. And my take is them wanting the process to be simple doesn't make it so. I am speculating, but I think that's coming from a good place. We want this to be accessible. We don't want people to feel discouraged. They should be able to appeal and keep pursuing this. But the process, as we know from working on this stuff, and then to some extent from obsessing over it in litigation and looking through thousands of pages, it isn't that easy. And some of the standards are published. As Cindy was mentioning, there's more available now than there used to be. FEMA put together a 250 or so page comprehensive guide about the whole individual assistance program. The portion in it focusing just on FEMA IHP was previously released with some minor edits now as the Individuals and Households Program Unified Guidance in 2016. We didn't used to have that. It used to be just all kinds of different policies, and you might get it from a case management meeting you attend, and maybe we get it from a listserv, but it was much harder than it is now. So a lot of that stuff is compiled. Great. And then you have basically 10 or 11 regulations that focus on the IHP program, as well as the statutes. There's still a whole lot that's actually being used to administer the program based on what I've seen from discovery in our 2008 lawsuit. And some of those standards that we saw control eligibility. Some of them control the appeals process. And so, read everything that's available. You want to know, and you want to look at the resources that Cindy was mentioning, but there's still more. And then in Texas, we've got another set of things. I don't have that on the slide, but I can send it out to anybody who's interested, or I'm sure Saundra's got it. But we've got a state handbook about how they administer the Other Needs Assistance Program, and some state regulations, Texas Administrative Code. All right, now to contrast with the FEMA quotes, we've got what the judge found in the lawsuit that TRLA filed on behalf of a number of clients in 2008. The particular standard we honed in on was, what does disaster-related mean? People aren't going to get home repair money if the inspector doesn't find that there was disaster-related damage that made the home uninhabitable. Okay, so they have to decide this fact based on whatever they've learned from FEMA. And we could not find in anything published, what does disaster-related mean? Think about torts class. Think about causation. That can mean different things to different people. And published, we couldn't find a standard that really set that out. The definitions, safe, sanitary, functional, that were in there, and my co-counsel, lead counsel, I think brilliantly kind of set out, it's very difficult to understand what these mean. They're just recombining words and that. So if anyone wants to read it, I'll send that out. But the judge ultimately agreed with us when we found in discovery this standard was being used, significant, obvious, and without question. That wasn't published anywhere. So no wonder it was so frustrating for our clients who were simply getting a letter saying, sorry, insufficient damage. And then in 2015, the court found that that actually violated the Administrative Procedure Act and Stafford Act. So our take is certain rules that actually meet the standard in the APA should be published. FEMA gets to set the standards the way that Congress allowed them to in the statute, but we need to know what they are. And that doesn't mean that it goes on to infinity. There's different things that may be underlying it that don't have to be published, but if it meets definitions in the Administrative Procedure Act, we should know about it, and our clients should know about it. Other courts have had occasion to take a look at the FEMA IHP regulations when other attorneys had challenged these things since Katrina and some before that. We also have something from an OAG Inspector General audit. But as opposed to FEMA saying it's easy, we've got FEMA even recognizes that its regulations are rather poor. Really, the only change that's been made to that since that finding was the housing regulation in 2013, and it still doesn't tell us what disaster-related means. It defines it as caused by disaster. It's still pretty vague. I won't go through all these, except my favorite is in 2006 when a judge in, I think, DC said that regulations are, it's Kafkaesque, this process. And that is how I think a lot of our clients feel, as opposed to it being easy. Cindy went through a lot of these kinds of things, but I just want to emphasize the cases, the way these things are going to come to you. You've got clients who need advice about these different things. You might head off a need to appeal if you are able to address that with them early on, and you know enough from training or experience or consulting with those with experience how to advise them. But other times you're taking the case to investigate it, seek extensions of those hotel vouchers. If they're doing it in 14-day increments, their client's going to need help roughly every 14 days, unless they get it through on their own. Great when that happens, but doesn't always. We're seeking continued rental assistance every couple of months or so is what we're seeing now. Appealing those denials or amounts, and then the recoupment cases when FEMA wants money back. And the housing stuff, another thing that's important for y'all in Texas and Florida to understand this distinction, FEMA allows one appeal on each particular issue. Now, there's different forms of housing assistance. I'm not saying you get one globally for all of housing, but if they got denied on ownership, you're supposed to just get one appeal under the regulations. In practice, they seem to consider more, so we've always done that, and we were told informally with some emails within the last few months that if there's new evidence, so hey, keep trying if you've got something new to work with. And then I would imagine that applies for the O&A program in Florida, where the state, the FEMA still administers O&A. But for us in Texas, that first appeal, just like you would on the housing stuff. You do it in writing, submit it, but if you don't get the outcome you think makes sense, you can seek a fair hearing. So I think one of y'all Lone Star's got public benefits experience. It's the same thing you would do on like a Medicaid or other state benefit case. And then beyond that, administrative review and judicial review. Standard review is going to keep getting higher each time, but we've got some extra processes we're able to use in Texas. Keep in mind your clients are dealing with other bureaucracies at the same time. So they went through some traumatic event and they're dealing with insurance possibly, FEMA, SBA, a nonprofit that may be able to help them with mucking out their home, and another one that's able to put up sheetrock. And to some extent us, right? If they're applying for legal aid with us, we want to be as mindful of the challenges involved in bureaucracy that they're dealing with and really do what you can to empower them to keep going and not become part of that. But lots of acronyms, jargon, they're going to be bounced around, and they get piecemeal information from those in the system. And our experience has been that a number of clients are going to get misinformation about what is going on with their case and what FEMA's policies and procedures are. Since you've got a pretty limited amount of information that's actually written and publicly available, you're forced to call the FEMA helpline or talk to somebody at the Disaster Recovery Center and say, what's going on with my case? Now, I don't have this in here, but I don't know if y'all have seen FEMA decision letters, but if you take a look at them, they have a code, and but they don't have anything factual about why that decision was made for your client. So it's hard to know how to appeal and what the situation is. Understand that the people that are working, at least for Hurricane Harvey, we had Tier 1 workers that were not as highly trained working at the disaster recovery centers. So we heard from a FEMA representative higher up, if you really want the information, you should call because you get a Tier 2 worker that has more training. Understand that you don't have one FEMA caseworker that's working the file from start to finish. You call or you talk to somebody at the Disaster Recovery Center. They're looking at the file on the computer, and they're going to perhaps read you what's there, which is about as good as it's going to get. Some interpret what's going on in there. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. They mean well, they're trying to be helpful, but sometimes that steers you wrong. So check in with people with experience if something seems kind of weird. And then you can request the file. Always request the file right at the outset. And 3 years ago when I was working on this stuff, sometimes we got the files within a week. Great. There's still limited information there. I won't get into all that. But man, for Harvey, we weren't getting files until months and months later, and that was when Saundra and I were actually emailing a high-level FEMA attorney who said, okay, and forwarded it to the right people, and then I had like 70 files in my office a week later. But you can't always count on that, so you're gonna have to make those calls. You could get different answers minutes apart. So again, you gotta just kind of consult people with experience. But this delays getting help to clients. So we've had clients told, oh my gosh, you have to bring in your birth certificate and this and that. And then we check and we're like, that doesn't seem right. The client doesn't know. They're kind of panicking. Oh my gosh. Oh, sorry. No, that's not necessary. I mean, that can just, somebody who doesn't have an attorney who's checking that out may say, I'm done. I'm not going to mess with this anymore. This is ridiculous. Because sometimes it is. No news is not good news when you're working on these cases. One thing to understand is decision letters still go to your client. This is not like in other agencies where you say, I'm the attorney of record. It's not like court. FEMA will continue to talk to your clients. And so you need to talk to clients about your expectations on that. Too many cooks in the kitchen can be a problem for how you're presenting things. And then they may be getting the decision letter. So if you've been waiting 3 months and you haven't heard anything, you better be checking in with your client. But if they haven't heard from FEMA early on after Harvey or when we have a lot of stuff going on, maybe it is taking that long to get an inspection done. But maybe they checked the box saying all the notices are going online. You better check there. If they got information about housing, but gee, haven't heard anything about any of the other needs assistance, have they applied for that SBA loan? Because they may just not be thinking about that letter and not have connected those dots. But we've told a lot of clients, you better go apply for that. FEMA inspectors, very, very important to this process. And FEMA will tell you they don't decide eligibility. And that's true. They don't decide eligibility, but they decide the facts that then can control the outcome of what FEMA is going to say. They control eligibility by making these factual findings. They are, when they go to your home, they are going to ask you for proof of your ownership of the home if you are an owner, and they're going to decide whether to check off yes or no. They're going to decide if you occupy the home, and then they're deciding if those damages are disaster related, and then on top of that, whether they affect habitability. If they say yes, you get money for what that line item is that they've decided was disaster related. If they say no, it's not affecting habitability, no money, or no money for that item. They decide other things on the other needs assistance to understand too that I think it's 90-something%, and a lot of this I'm basing on the 2008 information. As far as I understand, this is still the same way, but when I'm going to throw out percentages, it's based on that. 90-something% of the original decisions, when people got those letters, that was decided by a computer. You know, inspectors made their findings on a tablet or something, uploaded it, and then the computer processed it and spit out letters. So sometimes you will have more generic cryptic codes in those initial letters, and then a more detailed one later on, because appeals get decided manually. All right. Most of the FEMA inspectors are not actually FEMA employees. For that matter, a lot of the folks that you are going to encounter working for FEMA after these things, especially when you have something like our series of disasters in 2017, they've got a surge workforce. These people haven't been working on FEMA stuff long. So they're trained and that quickly. They're doing the best they can, I'm sure, but it's going to affect the quality of the information you're getting. But these inspectors are generally working for 2 big contractors that FEMA works with and asks to have inspectors in the field quickly after there's a declaration. Just think about how many inspectors they had to quickly ramp up to deal with. I think it was 4.5 million FEMA applications between the 4 huge disasters we dealt with in late 2017. The company does provide some training to folks on FEMA policies and procedures. For the 2008 lawsuit, my understanding was it was something like 6 to 8 hours of training. And I don't know what it is now. I hear there's a lot of materials available to them, but I think it's dependent on that inspector. Are you going to consult, or are you just going to quickly do that? Each and every one of them has the power to make fact findings that control a particular client's eligibility. They can't use a ladder to get up and look at the roof, and roof damage comes up a lot in certain kinds of disasters. They also don't go under the house, so if you've got foundation or plumbing issues, you've got clients who had pier and beam homes, that's a problem. But for safety reasons, they're not allowed to do that. I've had inspectors that don't speak the same language as my client. So even though now there's some language in the comprehensive policies that you're supposed to ask people what disaster damage they think occurred, that's hard to do if they can't communicate. And there have been bonuses if they hit quotas in the past under the contracts FEMA has with these companies. So if you hear clients say, man, they weren't there very long, they were rushing, sometimes those folks are really moving for those reasons. And then we have this just underlying concern that the standards, since we don't know exactly what they're applying for all these different things, are they clear enough to contribute to consistent decisions inspector to inspector? You will hear people say, why did my neighbor get help and I didn't? But it may boil down to what that inspector understood the rules to be and how they exercise the discretion that is allowed for if the rules are not specific enough. I won't go through these because they were covered pretty much on Cindy's PowerPoint, but these are the common appeals we would do. Also, we frame those award amounts as a partial denial. If somebody gets $99 to repair their home and they have an estimate saying, I needed $7,000, I don't understand this, we consider that a partial denial. It's the same standards that lead to insufficient damage denials that leads to those low award amounts. All right, and very quickly. This is from one of our clients in the FEMA lawsuit. And he and his wife, they didn't have very much income. This home was damaged by this big old storm, and he had a contractor's estimate saying $10,000. And FEMA gave him, let's see, we got holes in ceilings and that here, 0, saying insufficient damage. And the explanation he got in his letter, and this one is from a few years ago, so it's changed a little bit last year, but I won't read the whole thing here, but if y'all, I guess y'all don't have a copy, but it's in Dropbox. This is the information somebody gets. And it was our take. I got to credit my lead counsel, Jerry Westovich, for figuring this out. But I mean, there's different ideas in here. Is the problem that the inspector didn't find there to be disaster-related damage at all? Or there was disaster-related damage that didn't make your home unsafe to live in? Or there was disaster-related damage made your home unsafe to live in, but we think you can afford to fix it. There's a whole lot of stuff to unpack there, but just those are problems. And so it makes it very difficult to meaningfully appeal if you don't know what they're looking for. This is a Harvey case, the client's home before, the client's home after Harvey ripped through there. See this letter in the corner, the local government said her home was not safe to live in, but she also got 0. And FEMA saying insufficient damage, home is safe to occupy. And this is after FEMA's told us, well, we changed our reg in 2013, and we're going to redefine this as caused by disaster. We're saying that's still too vague. They also tell us we don't use the term deferred maintenance that they were using in 2008 that contributed to that pretty harsh standard. We don't do that anymore. We only tell them recorded if it was caused by disaster. My take is that's pretty arbitrary, and if people have got different discretion to apply that, or there's really some other rule underlying it that's just not published. And it's important that folks know that because it is outcome determinative. This is the letters we were getting after Harvey. Understand too, the goal, if you are appealing an insufficient damage denial or the amount of an award, the goal is a second inspection. They're not gonna look at a contractor's estimate and say, oh, our inspector said 0, your contractor, who's like your expert, says 10,000, so we'll just send you a check. No, they need to rely on their own eyes and ears. They send out another inspector. You're not guaranteed that second inspection. That's what you're working for in those appeals. You're giving them supporting documents. I won't go into all of that, but you give them those documents because you're saying second guess your inspector. I don't think they got it right. And I think understanding that these folks only have to have a background check, a criminal background check, don't have to have construction experience or insurance adjuster experience. Some do. But you think about how many inspections got done for those 4.5 million or so people that applied after the series of storms we had in 2017. Well, I'm sure a lot of those inspectors did not have that kind of experience, but many, many people were affected by their decisions. The fact that you have to get an inspection then before FEMA can decide if their first inspector got it wrong means you need losses there to verify. So there are some situations that's going to be really difficult. If you have a renter who's not in control of the premises anymore, or if you have somebody who is going to make makeshift repairs, and for our Harvey stuff, where decisions were taking at least 90 days in the beginning, and then if you appeal, you're talking about do they live in a situation that is uninhabitable for that long, or do they make makeshift repairs? Take photos, do what you can, but your clients need to understand, I'm not sure what's going to happen if that's the method of loss verification we're going to have to rely on, but what do you do? But we've also learned this disaster in just in a handful of cases. There are alternative methods for inspection. So if your client has weird facts like that and is not going to benefit from that second inspection, understand that and then push FEMA, what do we do about this? Because he shouldn't be out of the opportunity to seek more assistance just because we think first inspector got it wrong, but you're going to have to be creative. How does that work? We've had situations where we appealed an insufficient damage denial for home repair, only to have the decision come back, maybe get past that hurdle, but gee, we don't think they're the owner. First inspector did, but if you get that second inspection, inspector's looking at everything again. And so you may be able to address that on appeal. I had at least one where they're like, no, now it's final, we're done looking at this. And that was frustrating. Bottom line with what I'm going with here is we want more transparency about what these standards are. FEMA can make them the way that they are allowed to make them, but we want to know what they are, and we want consistency in those decisions. And I agree with FEMA, what they put in this press release, do not give up. Persistence is key in working these cases. And I'll turn it over to Saundra.
Okay, so as you know, I'm Saundra Brown. I work at Lone Star Legal Aid. And this is part of what I do. I work at Lone Star, but I'm also working with the Disaster Legal Aid webpage, and I've done that since 2012. And that generated this handout of pro tips for dealing with FEMA. Tracy, of course, mentioned a lot of them in her presentation you just heard. Cindy mentioned some great points in her part of it. So this is the encapsulation of the tips that we got there. So just going over them really quickly. It's called FEMA, work the file. So what happens is you file your appeal. FEMA's supposed to roll within 90 days. If they don't roll, that's deemed a denial. Actually, that's not what's going on right now. They're telling us, even though it's after 90 days, that files are still under consideration. So that's good. And you can talk to FEMA. They might misunderstand. They might see something. They see it clearly one way. You see it clearly another way. By calling to talk about the status, that's how you can tell what's going on with it, and it gives you another chance for advocacy for the clients. Tell the clients to prep your clients for the inspection. As Tracy said, they tell you it's not determinative, but it really is, because they're who decide the occupancy, the ownership, et cetera. So you need to prep the clients like you were for anything else. And that's the point of tip 2, asking questions from the FEMA inspector. Make sure the inspector sees all the damage. Don't be afraid to ask questions because they're not very well trained. After Harvey hit, FEMA told us they had hired 2,700 new inspectors right away. Well, that gives you the idea of the amount of training that they got. They were all on board. Anecdotally, we know that people within 2 or 3 houses of each other, one person would get full FEMA benefits, the other person would get 1,000. So then we would do a supplemental appeal to get more benefits. And that difference is explained by the inspectors. What we've been noticing anecdotally is that the longer-term trained FEMA inspectors were the people that were more likely to do that. The other people walked in and walked out, as Tracy said, bonuses. It would impact the level of training of your inspector, clearly impacted the amount of damages some people received. So the next ones, don't fail to question your FEMA inspector's determination. Empower your client to keep appealing. Sometimes people get burned out and they don't want to. As Tracy said, you can appeal on the transportation, you can appeal on the personal property, you can appeal on the housing assistance, you can appeal on continued rental assistance. So one client might end up with four FEMA appeals. You might be doing them all in one appeal on all the issues if they present at once, or you might be doing them as completely separate appeals because they didn't all present, but these are actually 4 appeals. Faxing your appeal, that's mine. I don't like the online. It's great. They've got to click the appeal button. We've got problems. We're seeing problems in connection with the FEMA appeals and applications online. They ask you if you want to deal online, if you want to deal with written. We've seen a lot of people that have signed up online to receive notices online, but it's really their granddaughter that signed them up for it, and then the granddaughter goes back to college, and then we get someone in that has no idea how to get into their FEMA account. It's problem 1 with the online. Problem 2 is FEMA has a click appeal button. People go, click, I appealed. Well, you're also supposed to click appeal, upload your appeal letter, upload your evidence, and you should be referencing your evidence in your appeal letter. But some people, if they don't have a lawyer, they go, I appealed, click. That's a problem. So that's, and then we know that people have been talking to FEMA saying, I appealed, and they go, yep, you appealed, and I see where you uploaded your FEMA appeal, but there's no evidence here. And they're going, what are you talking about? We can see the evidence. I see my evidence from my computer, but the FEMA employee cannot see the evidence you uploaded from his. That tells you there's a problem. So that's why I like to fax them in, because even if we're using the online, fax it in too. My husband says belts and suspenders. So you've got 2 ways of keeping your pants up, right? So use online. It's great, it's convenient, it's wonderful if it works, but fax in your appeal also, because then you've got your fax confirmation that you sent it in, and the next time they say, and we do hear this a lot, we don't have A, we don't have B, we don't have C. It's nice to be able to have proof, and we know at least one person can see the upload on his end, but FEMA can't see it on their end. So how many people got denied for that reason? So that's a tip. Never underestimate the relation building. That was Cindy talking about that. And as all of you know, you've got different organizations. Your organizations have connections, and you will make more connections. And it's the connections that work for preparation of a disaster and responding to the disaster. We do a lot of things by the relationships, not always filing an administrative complaint, not always filing a lawsuit. We've been very effective for our clients, all of us globally, by the relationships that we have built. For mixed families cases, that's what we call it, where the parents are on doc and the children are citizens, so then they're co-applicants. A parent will be a co-applicant with the child. So one problem they were talking about, I think Lindley brought this up, if they don't have a picture ID for the child, you do have to submit the information off the birth certificate, social security card, or other type of document, proof of public benefit, or, this is the one I love, a NUMIDENT, a numerical identification system file that comes from the Social Security Administration. So what do you do with the children who don't have photo IDs? That's what you do. So we already talked about prepping the client for the inspection, but there's another thing, a voluntary withdrawal. FEMA, we've had, I'm sure Tracy and other people have too, we've had inspectors that don't go out, and they might go by, and the client swears they were there, and they swear that the inspector never came, they never left, they never went anywhere, and the inspector will withdraw their application. So anytime you see a withdrawn application, it's not that your client withdrew it, it's that FEMA decided that they withdrew it, and usually it's the inspector that would decide that and report it. Once again, the inspector determining the outcome by determining a fact. Okay, sorry, and I'm just having a little problem looking at this here. So, and remember, you can appeal anything. You can appeal the dollar amount, you can appeal the withdrawal, you can appeal a termination, you can appeal a recoupment. Any decision FEMA makes, it's eligible for appeal. And another tip that we had is, we found out at Beaumont and Port Arthur, they were denying everybody who said, how much are your damages? And when the inspector would come or when they were doing their application, and the person would go, I don't know. They really didn't know. They didn't know the cost of repair. FEMA would consider that as zero and deny them. And it was actually Texas Department of Emergency Management employees that brought that to our attention, going, hey, look, we've got a problem. And they knew it was happening, so we did some more outreach there and got the clients, did the appeals, and helped the clients. But that's really bad if an honest, I don't know answer gets you denied. And it also points out the importance of the relationships. Okay, Tracy's tip was about the ONA and the FEMA assistance. So like in Florida, FEMA does both, but in Texas, they split it. And how that split happens is the state elects to do that. Like after Katrina, they left it all under FEMA. But Texas wants to control their own. And since Texas pays 25% of the ONA, the other needs, and the federal government pays 75%, they give the state that option. So they elect every disaster if they are or not, and they decide the list of the items that are considered the items that need replaced for personal property. That's all done on the state level, and they report that in November of every year to FEMA. So let's see, next one, prepare your client as you would for any representation. This is as important as any court case, so that makes sense. The more you prepare a client, the more comfortable they feel about what the situation is, and the more people know, always the better and more comfortable and more empowered that they would feel. Get detailed contractor estimates for damages and take high quality pictures of everything. That goes back to how do you show that the damages aren't what they saw. A lot of our appeals have been to get supplemental damages. A lot of appeals are insufficient damages or your home are habitable. Essentially, we're getting them with the contractor estimates. The second appeal comes out, but we wouldn't get there. And sometimes we've been told the second inspection's not happening, and they're actually being awarded on that. We've had a lot of people that went from 0 to $17,000, $15,000, $9,000. That's a big difference. You have no damages to you have over, $10,000. As for Tier 2 worker, Tracy mentioned that. If you're calling about a client that needs rental assistance, ask for the CHAD, the Continued Housing Assistance Department. Of course, they have a department, so you get the worker specifically. So if you just call in, you just go right over to the other department. And they're more helpful, obviously, because they do that. You don't need to have the actual legal title in order to be eligible for the home repairs. People don't understand that. You have to be the owner for FEMA definitions, which are set out in the Code of Federal Regulations, and it's 1, 2, 3. One's legal title owner. The second category is someone who doesn't pay rent, but is responsible for maintenance or taxes. And the third one is someone with a life estate. So if you're a surviving spouse and it was your husband's separate property, for example, you have a life estate under Texas law in that house. Therefore, you're an owner, and therefore, FEMA should treat you in the same manner as they would someone who is record title owner and give you those benefits. So that's why ownership is such an important issue. Because the second and third category are often generate denials with FEMA. Shared households are expected to stay together. Having a disaster and having to move out of your apartment and get a new one is not how you get everybody in an overcrowded house to get double sets of rent to move in there. That's the assumption. There are a lot of exceptions. For example, family violence would be one that you should be able to separate the family. And then there's issues regarding roommates, co-leases. So that it's just the provisions under the unified guidance are there. It sets it out very clearly. But just as a general rule, you need to know that. After Katrina, that was a big issue because part of the family would get sent to Atlanta and part would come to Houston. So there was a reason they had to split the households. But as a general rule, FEMA has to have them kept together. Be aware of what's going on with your community partner, where the case is going to. That brings multiple levels of your involvement in what you should be doing. First of all, we should be working with all the nonprofits so they all know we're doing legal issues and send the people to us that need the help. But additionally, we're trying to apply a holistic approach. Right now, 211 in the greater Houston area is your access to the case managers. The case managers are the doorway to have your people have their homes repaired under, for example, the Greater Houston Harvey Fund, right? So if FEMA doesn't give them money or that's not enough money, we've got them in the pipeline for the other services. So that's why that's important. And also, as I said, if they have one problem, they have 7 legal problems. A case manager, specifically these disaster case managers, help them put their lives back in order, and they're able to deal with the social needs. File a letter with the photo ID of your client before representing them. First thing we do is we send FEMA the notice of representation, and they swear under penalty of perjury. And then the other thing is that you send a request for the FEMA file because, also, we don't have time to get our FEMA files. Obviously, we had a big delay this year. Before our appeal deadline. So we file our appeals with the statement of, and I hereby reserve the right to supplement this appeal upon receipt of the FEMA file and further discovered evidence. And so we're just sticking our foot in the door going, don't shut them down yet. So I said we get the file, talk with the caseworkers at FEMA Disaster Recovery Centers. Make sure when you do go out to the DRC, you go talk to everybody in the place so they all know who you are and what you do. And that segues back to Tracy's point of, and the case managers on site were like, here, sign this appeal. Oh, so what's your appeal reason? I'm sorry, that's unfair. That's not enough money. Okay, here's the appeal, sign here. They shove that appeal in. That's not as effective as what the lawyers can do, obviously. And back to the click button that you don't even know you need to do anymore. So Tracy pointed out that you can reconsider if you know there's any new evidence, and I already mentioned that there's really 4 or 5 appeals depending on how many denials and what issues. Understand denial codes. This isn't as bad as it was before. This year's, the denial letters are saying what you need to submit to overcome that denial. So these letters, this disaster, have been more useful than in the past. But we had seen it before that you'd get like 3 cryptic letters, and from that you were supposed to know why you had been denied. And amazingly enough, there was a lawsuit over that. And amazingly enough, you'll be happy to know FEMA changed their ways. Let people know about other resources. Pro Bono Association, state bars know where to go when they learn they've had a legal issue other than a FEMA appeal. A lot of us are on a very generous grant that allows us to address other issues for impacted survivors. So if we weren't, and if you weren't with an organization that could handle everything, that would be more useful. And the last one's visit disasterlegalaid.org. And so there's just, she put it up the live page. Okay, I just want to move around a little bit just so you know this is here. Sorry, I have to get really close to it. Okay, so this is the home landing page, and I just want to show you really quickly. So on news and alerts, they'll show up here. We've got a Facebook page connected to it. And when I click that, this should bring up this one. So Inside Science. So we put up articles that are related. Generally, they're going to be nationally oriented. But when there's really big issues, oh my God, this year there have been tons of really big disasters. So we'll have some relating specifically to current big disasters. And then this one is a general article, but it comes from a source like Inside Science. So I look at articles, Jeannie Ortiz looks at articles, and when we see things, we put them up. And I don't want to close that. That one didn't go back. This one, I need to go back. So navigating on this page, the red one is the landing. It's got 3 targets. So originally, the web page is created after Katrina. This is an outgrowth of the Katrina Legal Help web page. If you look on the right-hand side of this page, you'll see that it's supported by Legal Services Corporation. So most of the civil nonprofit legal aids, Legal Service Corporation sponsored. The American Bar Association, we work closely with the ABA Young Lawyers Division, and that's the group that implements disaster legal services. And then the NLADA, National Legal and Defender Association, Pro Bono Net, which is the technical help, and this is their platform, and Lone Star, because I am helping with the content coordination and have been for a few years. So this is the landing page, real fast. This is just the landing page resources for people who need help. The second landing page is for the legal aid attorneys and the pro bono attorneys who are helping with legal issues. So these are resources for them, and that's how it's set up. And tomorrow we'll talk about flood insurance, but we've got resources here, tax relief, look at just some of them. And the third one is it's set up for pro bono attorneys to help after disasters. That's how they wanted to have it set up. And these are the resources for the pro bono attorneys. And of course, obviously, there's overlap between the legal aid attorneys and the pro bono attorneys, because after a disaster, we're all doing the same thing. And then this is what I wanted to show you because we're talking about FEMA, but I figured I'd just give you sort of an introduction to the page. So here's the Memorandum of Understanding between the Young Lawyers Division and FEMA, which is how they go into the DRCs, and then generally the local legal aids are designated by the ABA Young Lawyer Division, and that's how we go to DRCs. That's actually been an issue in lawsuits in the past. And joint guidance about civil rights after a disaster. That's important. Goes up to the top, available for everybody, the federal items, sorry. And let me just navigate out of that. And here's a FEMA authorization and consent. Most of ours are a variation on this. This was provided by FEMA, another bit of their guidance in 2014. They actually issued guidance on that, and most of us are using a form that's a version adapted from this. And just one more item I want to show you. So that's gone. Okay, good. And then I need to go back. Oh, actually, it's probably faster just to navigate to, just click back to the main page. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to show you is Cindy mentioned the uniform guidance. It's here. Anything on this page that you use from the web page is mobile friendly on your phone. And here's the Stafford Act, and here's the CFR she mentioned. I just want to show you. The e-CFR, then it can be on your phone. So you could be anywhere, you can use this, and I hooked it up to the e-CFR because look at that. It's updated as of July 6th. So that's one thing. You know the problem with web pages and links, they go bad, right? So this way, this is one link we never have to worry about. So that's what I wanted to show you. That was the tips. This is disaster legal aid, and that's why it's useful, because you can carry it with you everywhere you go. And generally, what you need will be there. And if it's not there, you email me, and then we'll make sure it gets there. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you to the three of you. And this is your opportunity to ask some questions. I'll start.
Sit down here.
Out of curiosity, do you have for the inspections, do you have a right to review that inspection at the time that it's being made?
They are doing them on pads, so you'd get it as part of the file. But you could ask them, I mean, why couldn't you ask them if they could send you an electronic copy? And they'll tell you can get a copy later, but we're generally getting them in the files. Trace, you're anything different?
Yeah, we've suggested that in the litigation and stuff before, and no, they don't. We've suggested that somebody why can't they print it out so that somebody can hold on to it and know and be able to discuss it with the inspector? So there's no right to that at this point. What you do get is that right to the file, and for what it's worth, the inspection reports that arrive in the file are nowhere near as detailed as what the inspector is actually recording. You have to kind of piece through it to understand what it means, and it doesn't tell you, for instance, if the inspector decided the damage recorded was making the home uninhabitable or not. You can't tell.
Can you FOIA that?
Well, you can get the file.
But the other stuff that you said isn't included.
You should be able to.
You should be able to if
some of it, my
populated.
understanding is it is stored electronically. The inspectors are filling it out on a tablet. So what we got in litigation was screenshots, right? So I think it's kind of like when dealing with other administrative agencies, you know, CPS or others. What they give you as the file is what's easy for them to download and you get. So I don't know, but we ask very, very broadly for all the stuff, and we get what we get. So it'd be worth a try, and actually I think there's some law students at Southern Methodist University in Dallas that are going to attempt something along those lines. But yeah, it'd be great to try.
My question is a little bit about the restriction of receiving FEMA funds if you have already received them. I think just for all of us, it's good general knowledge. Does it attach to the person? Does it attach to the property? And does it attach to our renters? Especially because there's people who, are, if they get not denied, but given $100, and that's not really very beneficial.
Right. That's addressed. It goes with the property for the life of the property. But the problem with that is subsequent purchasers might not know about it. It's not recorded in the real property records. You're sent a letter, and then it would be an issue that would be a material issue you should need to disclose to future purchasers, and then we're back to that whole problem of people being judgment-proof or dead even by the time you realize it's a problem. And I actually know people that that's happened to. There's talk about making it a requirement that the FEMA notice of needing to carry flood insurance forever is put in the real property records, and it's not just the FEMA benefits. If you get the FEMA hazard mitigation benefits, like if they elevate your house, even if you're elevated out of the floodplain, you have a duty to keep that property insured for flood forever. With regard to renters, as long as they're in that property, they're required to. If they would move to a different property, they wouldn't be. So that's a problem. Most people move out, and if it's bad enough, they damage other things, but not all of them do. The real practical issue, just like the real housing issue, is there's not enough affordable housing. And so the real practical issue with regard to all these people having all these requirements to have flood insurance, either on their personal property or their property, is they can't afford it. If they've flooded, they're probably in the floodplain, and then under the Bigger Waters Act, the flood insurance is supposed to increase over a 5-year period up to market rate with a cap. I think it was $25,000. So it's just prohibitively expensive for the clients that we deal with. So as a practical matter, honestly, I don't know if you are, Tracy, but we're seeing more denials because you'd flooded before and received benefits. And you can decline those benefits, but you have a very short window to do that. And most people, if you didn't have a lawyer talking to you, you wouldn't understand the ramifications. So somebody says, I'm going to give you money. You say, thank you very much. And you don't realize that this could impact you. So it happened in Sandy, because I do the webpage. I've had my fingers in a lot of the disasters. It impacted a lot of people in Sandy because there had been a flood the year before, and they got a little bit of money, and therefore they were supposed to have flood insurance. So when the Sandy damages hit, I mean, literally there were people trying to give back their money from the prior flood, and they're like, sorry, too late. And that's all addressed in the unified guidance, which is now changing to the other one. It's not final yet. As soon as it's final, stamped final, it'll go up on the Disaster Legal Aid webpage, but the unified guidance is there now. So yes, it doesn't feel fair, and yes, it's prohibitively expensive. So this is a problem. So we're seeing more of these people denied for that. Tracy, are you seeing more people denied?
Yes, when we've had these repeated
accepted
disasters.
Yeah.
Just real quickly, though, I just want to make sure it's clear. Not everyone who gets FEMA IHP money has to get flood insurance.
Right.
It's only if you're in that special flood hazard area. So you look carefully at the individual client's letter. It's not some global thing. Mm-hmm. And then it can affect their ability to get assistance again, but only if you're talking about flood damage. So you look really carefully. If there's a hurricane and there's wind damage, so it doesn't mean they can't get anything. And then some people, if it's within 3 years, I think it is, of the last disaster, they may have been able to qualify for a FEMA-provided group flood insurance policy. There's a lot of different specifics on that. But if the disaster occurs a little bit after that, your client's really going to have trouble because they probably couldn't afford it on their own.
And those policies, only cover them for the amount of benefits that they've received. So that's usually a very low amount because the average benefit from FEMA, last I checked, it was $6,000, $7,000. It was in that range for the people that actually got benefits. They're not generally getting the maximum amount. The maximum amount is actually very rare.
How do you recommend we advise clients who have misused funds? I've heard clients saying, oh, I used my personal property on transportation because FEMA told me it was okay, or they said whoever helped them with the application. So aside from letting them know to keep receipts and know that FEMA might come after them, what else do you advise, or how can we combat that?
Yeah, ask FEMA when they tell you can use it for another purpose to give them that in writing. But usually for us, it's after the fact. And that reminds me of another issue. It's why it's so important at the beginning to have lawyers that understand the disaster benefits, because people don't apply for disaster SNAP and instead are living off of their FEMA benefits. So if you understand all the benefits that are coming into play, which really not a lot of people do, it helps them maximize their recovery and helps prevent them doing that. So we advise them it's the possibility. FEMA does audit the files, not that many, but it's possible they could win the inverse lottery or reverse lottery and they could be audited. So you'd have to advise them it could be an issue, and FEMA could then recoup it.
So I would say tell them to contact you or seek a lawyer's assistance if they get a recoupment letter later, because I'm sure we've both done these recoupment proceedings where you argue, look, they spent it this way, but it was still a disaster-related expense, and depending on other factors in the recoupment or the request that they compromise the debt, it may still be good. Now, if they spent it on a trip to Vegas or something like that, you're gonna have a harder time. But if they spent it on something that was essential, it may play out differently. And then it's the biggest problem while we're continuing to work with people if they misspent rental assistance, because you have to keep asking for that every couple months, so you better have the right receipts on that. That's a bigger issue.
That's another one. That's where I get my exercise.
Okay, 2 questions. How do we get on the disaster legal listserv? And the second one is, are there any FEMA trainings or certifications that would be helpful for us?
FEMA does all these trainings, and I got a few of their ISO training levels, the beginning training levels, but FEMA doesn't do trainings for what we do generally. It was interesting to do it, and I understand the National Disaster Framework better after having done it, but more it's the FEMA trainings that we do for the issues that you need to help the clients. FEMA does have many, many trainings, so you can go online and look at their training library, and it's more geared toward the emergency management personnel. So you can look, and if you find one that's awesome, let me know. But they are not geared, they're more geared toward the emergency management personnel than any other group.
And I have a few questions. Number one, you guys mentioned that they're not allowed to go on the roof and they're not allowed to look at the foundation. So what happens? How do they figure that out? It's just not considered at all?
No, they record what they observe, but they're doing it from the ground. We had one inspector tell our client he had a magic camera. So, I mean, which is bizarre and whatever. But yeah, they're still making decisions about the extent of damage that occurred to the roof, even though they can't get up there and look at it.
Okay.
And that's what's nice about what now is supposed to happen is for them to record the client's description of the damage. I mean, at least there'll be something in the file to show that someone is saying there's that damage.
Well, and I'm just going to put it, I think that they have to ask the client, but I don't think they have to record it.
They don't have to record it, okay.
They don't
They
have to
have to
record what
ask.
the client says, but that would be
Yeah.
tremendously
And this
helpful.
may be a weird question, but why are these inspectors so cheap? Like, are they getting bonused on like denying benefits? It just seems like if they're not getting that much training from FEMA, and they're just going out there, and you would like to hope that most people like to help their fellow human beings, why are they being so cheap? Where's the directive coming from?
Well, I mean, FEMA designs its standards and they expect the inspectors to apply them. We have heard that some inspectors' findings have been subject to like a quality control kind of inspection or a correction inspection if the amounts were estimated to be too high. But I haven't seen that kind of thing in writing. That's purely anecdotal, okay? But, and you know, if FEMA has to manage a finite amount of money that's available for this program, as long as the standards are transparent, you know, and you've got that consistency, it may be something that we look at as cheap. We just want to understand what the standard is and make sure that it's being applied consistently, inspector to inspector.
One last question about SBA, because I just know from the grapevine that a lot of people are choosing less benefits from SBA because they don't want to put a lien on their home. So their damage may be potentially $40,000, $50,000, but they're only agreeing to the $24,999 so that they don't get a lien. So is that a concern for like just for future disasters? These houses aren't being really repaired to where they need to be. Is that being communicated to, like, what's the effect if the client only takes a little bit of the money instead of the whole money, does some makeshift repair? How is that going to affect, you know, their relationship with SBA and their loan payment and all that stuff?
I mean, go ahead.
If they've got a mortgage, that would be an issue because one of their conditions of their mortgage would be to keep the property in good repair. So that would be the first thing that pops into my head. So that's a personal decision for people. I mean, your job as an attorney is just to advise people. So it's obvious that the SBA is requesting a lien on the property because the paperwork's there. So with regard to are they being educated, you know, unless they're talking to an attorney, unless there's a disaster case manager that's trained on that issue, they can ask SBA, but SBA, like FEMA, they have scripts and constraints, and our SBA person's here. They're not going to advise them one way or the other. You need an attorney to tell you pros and cons of decisions that you make. I mean, a real issue after each disaster is more and more properties are damaged and not repaired. The housing stock is impacted after each and every disaster. And the fact that we have so many of them in Texas and also in Florida has a cumulative effect. That's a fact.
And to the extent that someone's underestimating the damage to be able to get a smaller loan, not that they're doing that, but if they are doing that, you need to think about the repercussions to recovery from the CDBG-DR funds later, to the extent that it wasn't making you whole. So there are other considerations.
Okay, I would like to thank the panel.